Welcome to Lead Poison.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Lead Poison podcast, brought to you by youcanpaint.com.au. Please head to youcanpaint.com.au for issue 1 of their how-to series, How to Paint Your House and Save Thousands. My name is Jack, your host. Today on the show, I'll be speaking with Matthew Peet. Matthew is an original b-boy who, along with his counterpart Wisdom and many others, was present in the foundational years of the Australian hip-hop culture. Since then, he has become one of the world's most prominent graffiti writers, but most notably, Matthew works with young people here in Australia and abroad through his Crosswords community and the Street University. Matthew has devoted his life to not only excelling in the elements, but giving others a platform to excel as well. He truly is altruistic in his approach to the hip-hop culture, and as a genuine pioneer has done more than his share in ensuring its survival. I enjoyed our conversation very much, and I hope you do as well. So please welcome Matthew Peet. So first of all, man, I know if you're anything like me, you're probably sick of hearing about COVID and stuff, but it's been pretty challenging for Australians on a whole. How has you and your family sort of been dealing with the pandemic?
You know what, man? Like it's been a crazy ride. You know, like as everyone knows, there's no real playbook for this. You know, and you know, life happens, man. Like I was in the middle of moving. I had a baby come in the middle of lockdown early. You know, and so, you know, I'm still like in the middle of moving, but I'm looking at the positive sides. The positive sides is that I'm working from home. I'm here with my newborn baby and my 2-year-old much more than I would have been previously if I was working, you know, at Street Uni at Liverpool or stuff like that. But I can still do generally what I'm doing, even though it's online, you know.
Yeah, nice, man. Well, congratulations on the newborn.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
How's your sleep going?
What sleep?
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's tough times. Good fun, though.
More for my wife, man. So props to my amazing wife.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally. Well, that's good to hear that you're making the most of it. I've been getting that vibe off a lot of people. I was sort of in the same situation and just try and took the positives out of the whole thing. It's actually been pretty good for me personally. Professionally, not so much with money and things like that, but for my personal life, and it sounds like for you as well, it's just a bit of a reset. So yeah, it's been good in that regard. Matthew, I just want to take you back a little bit. So as I mentioned before, just in my little brief intro, back in 1989, you formed a hip hop group called Brethren with Wisdom.
Yep.
And then obviously you went on to form various other crews and do a lot more after that. Just to give the listeners an idea of the time span, I was born in 1990, so that was a year before I was born, and I'm now 30. So you've been involved for a long time, and you've obviously seen a lot of changes. I'm really interested in what the hip hop scene was like back in those early days. How much of an impact did it have when it arrived in Australia on your life?
Well, I mean, to sort of go into that, I have to go like way before Brethren, and that was sort of like the early 80s when breaking first came to Australia. And that was via, you know, video clips like Malcolm McLaren's Buffalo Gals or Rocksteady Crew with Hey You the Rocksteady Crew, Up Rock, and then the movies like Breakdance, you know, or Breaking as it was called in America, and Beat Street. And so for a lot of us, you know, like breaking is the most dynamic sort of aspect of hip hop culture, you know? And so pretty much in that era, I was 12 or 13, we just fell in love with breaking, and you know, and everyone was breaking. It was like a massive big sort of like, for want of a better term, a fad, you know, and every school had multiple breaking crews, and you'd go to a shopping center, there'd be other crews and you'd battle them and all that sort of stuff. But you know, because of those movies and the video clips, and the more we looked into it, the more we sort of started to dabble in the other elements of the culture. So graph, rapping, for people that could get access to sound equipment, DJing, and also production later on down the track. And so you know, even though technically graph existed before hip hop, you know, for some of us, you know, it was a case that, you know, we started to specialize, or we started to, you know, do a whole bunch of different things. And for me, I didn't get into DJing, although I love it, I appreciate it. I've hosted DJ battles and stuff like that. But yeah, I got into graph, and I was always drawing as a kid. I was into comic books and all that. So graph became the thing that was probably the most natural for me. I was a terrible breaker. I still am a terrible breaker, but I still get down. And rapping. So, you know, I started to rap, and yeah, it was a case that if you're a graph writer, right, we weren't called it graph writers then. We were just b-boys that did graffiti, you know, or, you know, we were b-boys that rapped a bit, or whatever. And then that sort of initial breaking sort of wave started to peter out, and there weren't many breakers at all, you know. And at that, in the sort of like late 80s, early 90s, yeah, probably late 80s, I was in one of the only breaking crews in Sydney, you know, and it was like Wicked Force, you know, so B-Boy All Stars, you know, Queensland and Melbourne, and then a few individuals, B-Boy Maze in Perth, or High Five in Perth, and it was really small, the breaking scene, but rapping became more prominent. Graph became really prominent in Australia. Like Australia just ran with graph, and yeah, especially like things like the mags, the graffiti mags, like Vapors and then Hype, you know, and that really put us on the map with global hip hop, like the graph side of things, you know.
Yeah.
It's funny. I got an interesting story about that. One time, I was in New York, and this dude hit me up on social media and was like, "Hey man, you know, I'd be keen to paint with you if you're down." He's from Coney Island, and I was like, "Listen, I'm only here for one more day. I'm painting in the Bronx. It's not my wall, but it's other dudes have hooked it up. But if you want to come and hang, you know, drop by, you know." And so this dude turned up. We were just kicking it after we're on the train, and then I said, "Oh, so you know, so tell me, man, like," because I didn't really know the guy. He just hit me up on social media, and he said, "Listen," he goes, he pulled out of his bag a copy of Vapors magazine and Hype magazine, and he goes, "You don't realize," he goes, "for us in New York, there was a bit of a gap, you know," and he goes, "So for my generation of writers, you know, most of the guys from Subway Art had disappeared or given up. We looked overseas." And so he goes, "Me and my homies, we looked to Australian writers, man. You know what I mean? And European writers and stuff like that." And so he was like fully down with Australian graph. And he's like, "Oh man, what's Unique up to? And what's Spice up to? And what's Outlaw doing?" I was like, "Man, me and Outlaw went to school together." And he was like an expert on Australian graph, but from New York, you know. So Australia really did make a mark internationally with graph, you know. And then a lot of dudes went overseas as well, you know, like Casino went overseas, and Demo, you know, Atome, like I went overseas, you know. There was a few of us, you know.
Yeah, definitely, man. That's interesting to see that the birthplace really is relying on somewhere it's, you know, like an island country like Australia for inspiration. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And obviously Hype Mag and the Hype Twins, you know, played a big part in that. You mentioned briefly that there was sort of a hiatus in the breakdancing scene. Why do you think breakdancing has was there a cultural shift that affected its popularity in the past?
I'm not really sure why. I think it was just like, you know, like stages where people are into yo-yos, or they're into hula hoops, or kids are into just the latest thing, and then that petered out. And then if you were a breaker or a b-boy or b-girl, you were like into hip hop, you know. And there was, like I said, there were a few of us that kept on going all the way through, and you know, and then, you know, there was a period where me and some of the boys, we started to just train just to sort of maintain, and that's when the Run DMC Jason Nevins track came out, that had the breaking in the video, and then there was a new generation that got into it from that.
Right.
And then, you know, when the internet sort of started to kick in and people started watching international battles, then another generation sort of fell in love with it because of that, you know. But it's one of those things. you know, everyone has the different reasons for getting into the culture, and you know, I'm a big supporter of all the generations. Hence why, you know, I do the youth work and stuff like that. You know.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I'm really looking forward to drilling down a little bit into that stuff. But before we do, where do you see sort of the hip hop culture on a whole in Australia at the moment in 2021? Do you think it's as robust as it once was?
Well, sort of to segue it with what you were mentioning before, you know, how the scene used to be and all that. When rap came to the fore, you know, there were a few crews, but you would go to a hip hop jam and you pretty much knew everybody because everyone was a producer or an MC or a DJ. And we always longed for the day when we would have fans that weren't us. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like they were actually outsiders. You know what I mean, so to speak.
totally.
And then we started to see that with like when groups blew up, you know, and you had like Hilltop Hoods or Bliss and Esso or you know guys like that. That the average Aussie panel beater that wasn't into hip hop culture was into Australian rap groups, you know, and we were like, oh, that's interesting, you know, like it's sort of come along that way, and now you know, then that has just continued, you know, and now you've got different styles of rap. You know, you've got the drill guys, or you know, all the different sort of sub genres of hip hop in a broad sense, or rap music, with all manner of people into it. You know, but one thing that's very different is in the older generations, you were committed to a subculture, and that caused beef. So, like for example, like I couldn't go to beach areas because I was a bomber, so to speak, you know, and so we'd have to punch on with the wax heads there or the surfers at the beach, you know, or like skinheads or punks, and they were like into what they were into, and that was it, and there was tension, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's no biggie that you just listen to everything. You listen to all different genres, you know, like your fashion, you know, reflects a bit of everything. Whereas like we were almost like in uniforms. If you saw someone with fat laces and a pair of sneakers and you know a hoodie and a baseball cap, you knew that they were either a graph writer or an MC or whatever. Whereas that could be anyone nowadays.
Totally. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's more of a melting pot, I guess, these days, and so many different people get involved from all walks of life. So yeah. Do you you know, I mean, if you're anything like me, I often look back with a little bit of nostalgia about how things once were and things like that. Is there a period of time in your life that you look back on as sort of, you know, the golden years, so to speak, of the culture?
I look fondly on many of those years, but I don't long to go back to them, you know, and that can sometimes be a trap for some of the old school sort of generation, because it's like there were happier times back then, but also sometimes we can sort of see the past with rose-colored glasses as well, because in as much as you know, like breaking was like on the street, you know what I mean, and graph was like real raw and all that sort of stuff. There were also negatives to it as well, you know. But you know, yeah, of course, man. Like just as a kid, you know, you look back on your childhood of like, you know, whether it's like whether your thing was like skating in the neighborhood with your boys or whatever. You know, for me, like every weekend, getting out the cardboard in the driveway of the you know the apartments that we lived in, and the neighborhood kids come and we get a ghetto blaster out and break all day. Like that's dope, man. I'm lucky to do 5 minutes without having a virtual cardiac arrest now.
Yeah.
But that's an age thing. But
Yeah.
like, man, I love that. You know what I mean? And even like what you were saying about the early days of rap, it was kind of cool going to jams and you knew everyone. You know, because like you talk, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working on a demo. Oh, someone said, oh man, there's a record company interested in me at the moment, or you know, hey, you want to jump on this collab? You know, and you know, like Death Wish Cast, you know, did their legendary album, you know, Knights of the Underground Tables, and you know, like there's a track on at the end of the album called The Saga, and it's got like who's who of like that generation because we all knew each other, you know.
For sure, man. And I feel I've been looking, I was involved sort of in hip hop culture in regards to graph and a little bit of rapping and things like that, but I never really looked too in depth into sort of the history. I knew whatever I knew basically, but lately I've been really looking into, guys like yourself and Death Wish Cast and Bill and Jamie Moulton and beyond that too, and sort of just finding little avenues of the culture that I didn't really know about. And it's been really interesting. But one thing I have noticed was, and I could be completely wrong about this, but there used to be what seems to me like a sort of mentorship in the culture from one generation to the next. And I'm curious to ask, do you think that sort of idea is not so much around anymore within hip hop?
You know what? Like in Subway Art and Style Wars, it talks about mentors and raising up the new generation. But also there was the exact opposite as well. Like for example, DJs would cover their vinyl so you couldn't tell the name of the track or the artist they were playing. And the graph scene was much more violent then, because it was like just sort of like shifting out who was real and things like that. I was very fortunate that one of the OGs, probably, I mean, the first guy to probably do a piece in Sydney, Cass Dem 2, he took me under his wing and he explained to me, this is what letters are about, this is how you structure things, and he sort of mentored me, and then I was like, okay, so that's how it's done. But I had other dudes, because I came from Bankstown into the city. So I'm a Bankstown boy. Originally moved into Petersham, Marrickville area, and I also copped mad hate from dudes like, "Who the hell are you?" and trying to sort of keep me down. But I was like, I don't want to be like that. I want to be like Cass, and so that's been my ethos ever since. And there's always going to be that in everything, whether it's sport or business or whatever. But my sort of reckoning, my way of understanding it is like, the culture is going to die if you keep on pressing people down, and if you really want people to understand the culture and its history and all that, then that's part of your job, man, is to educate them, and not in an arrogant way too, because we could easily just sort of like keep the keys to ourselves and just give a few little crumbs, and then hate on everything, but my thing is like, man, let me provide all the context and let me support you in your development, you know what I mean, and where you're going to take it. Because, like one thing that we always sort of said with Brethren is, even though we're sort of like old school dudes, we didn't want to make old school music. We grew up listening to, like your classic New York sound and all that sort of stuff, and that's like our foundation. But it's like, I can't just keep on regurgitating that over and over again. Otherwise, it's just going to get boring, and we need to add our own flavor to it. And that's why, we will talk about things that were relevant to us. We weren't sort of just like, recreating American stuff, But you've got to give props, respect the architects and all that sort of stuff, And even in my workshops, like when I'm teaching graph, I'll go through New York graph, Dondi, Scene, Scheme, like all these like legends, Devious Doze. And then and I'll go, okay, now let's look at Europe, the Chrome Angels, Mo2 and those guys, and then we'll go, okay, now Australia, like Fab Four, CIS, like, all these other dudes, and and then later generations as well, because they're part of the timeline too,
Yeah, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in, as you said before, in terms of nostalgia, in how things once were and whatnot. So it's good to keep things fresh and look to the future about how things are evolving as well.
Yeah.
Do you have any, just speaking of graffiti, do you have any formal training in art at all?
Yeah. So when I was at school, I went to Newdown Boys High in my last few years. I was very fortunate that I had an art teacher that supported me in graph, whereas most of the art teachers hated it, and she said, "Oh man, you should try and pursue this." I applied to City Art Institute, which I think became, I forget what it's called now. Anyway, they did not want to touch it with a barge pole, because they were like, that's not art, forget that crap. Many years later, I gave up on it. I was like, forget the art world. And then, many years later, I reapplied, and I thought, I'm just going to say I'm a writer and that's it. And I was very fortunate because the guy that interviewed me actually lived next to one of my pieces in Stanmore. And he goes, "Oh, did you do that one?" And I go, "Yeah, man." And he's like, I'm interested in what makes these guys tick, And so as a bit of an experiment, he allowed me to go in at National Art School and do my diploma in fine arts.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I did a diploma. It wasn't a university level thing back then. It was a part of TAFE. And then a few years later, I was just sort of doing my thing. I was hanging out with a few different academics. They were getting me to speak at universities with them about hip hop culture and Australia and identity and all that sort of stuff. And they said to me, "Man, you should be one of us, man. Be an academic." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And so, yeah, I just applied to National Art School many years later and just said, "Listen, I did my diploma here. I've been speaking at these universities. These academics endorsed me and they let me get in to do my honours degree." So I did my honours degree in fine arts. And then straight away I went along and did my master's degree. So I've got a master's degree in fine arts.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about you. That's really cool.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily only do graph when I'm there, So, I did everything from installation of sculptures and all that, but I also did graph as well, like straight spray paint on walls,
Yeah, totally. You've done a little bit of corporate and sort of commercial work as well with brands and things like that. Do you enjoy that type of work?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it's a pain, but it's a job. You know what I mean? So I know anyone here that has to pay the bills using their art form. That there's a certain amount of overitness. Like you're doing like some corporate jobs, and it's not necessarily fun. But I try and sort of make it as fun as I can. And I will, and the price really will be dependent on how cool it is for me, to be honest.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. To be blunt, but yeah, hey, it's good, and it's good for the portfolio, and like, especially when it's like something like like I did some work for Puma and Adidas, and as a hip hop head, like, man, grew up wearing that stuff, so it's kind of cool. And I did some work as a comic artist as well, and being a comic head, back in the days, it was cool. I was doing some work for Mad Magazine for a while, and I grew up reading Mad Magazine. So that was like a personal tick, and I did a little bit of freelance stuff for Disney as well. And, I grew up drawing Mickey Mouse and Scrooge McDuck and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that obviously has a big influence that comics do in your characters and things like that, because they're awesome, man. I love seeing your characters around.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, they're really good. So just continuing on with graffiti a little bit, and I want to get into your, crosswords and everything you're doing there, but I think the narrative around graffiti from the general public anyways is can be negative at times, and I'm sure you're aware of that. And sometimes for good reason too, but obviously you're incorporating, as you said, you're teaching young people how to do graffiti and the history and things like that. How important do you think graffiti can be in a young person's life for like the development of their creativity, that particular art form?
Well, like I've often done some stuff in schools, and the teachers have said to me, like, this kid here, for example, was fully disengaged from school, not interested in anything that we were trying to teach, but loves graph, and then they've just clung to it and then run with it, and one of the reasons I think that it's like that is, stuff in art galleries and that has no relevance to this kid's life. He's cruising around or she's cruising around, they're seeing pieces every, and they're like, I want to do that, and so, I'll use graph, not in a bad way, but like graph will be my way of connecting with that young person, and but because I've got a background in other forms of art as well, I'll go, okay, let's talk color theory, and normally they'll just glaze over, you know what I mean? Oh, color theory are boring, right? And I go, okay, let's talk about the color wheel. Primaries and secondary colors. How do you make a color bright? You work with the color that's opposite on the color wheel. So if you do a green piece and you want it to stand out, you do a red outline because that's opposite on the color wheel. Oh, right, that's how I make my piece. you know, and the complementary color, if I wanted to make it more chill, I use the one next to it, you know, oh, right, that's the language that I speak, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I see that it's a mad way for young people to catch their vision. It worked for me, you know, like, and so, you know, I'm very fortunate that I'm doing art as a career. You know, I worked as a forklift driver in a printing factory, you know what I mean? And then when art started to take off and started to develop for me as a professional, I was like, sweet, I'm going to pursue this. And so, you know, I try and sort of use me as an example of like, yeah, man, you can do this. And especially coming from like Southwest Sydney and that, and, you know, where people are told they're going to be this or that. I was like, nah, you can do your own thing a little bit too, you know, like don't limit your options, you know, because of stereotypes. But yeah, I've seen it time and time again where a young person, you know what, like they might not necessarily pursue graph as their career. You know, like I know one guy I was working with, you know, he was like interested in designs. He was painting. He was like painting trains and all that sort of stuff, you know. And so we worked on style and this and that. And then he ended up, you know, getting into the graphic design side of things and started a t-shirt company, you know, and that became a career for him, you know. And you know, and one of the things that I'm always quick to say is like, I'm not going to tell a young person what they should do. You know, that's the last thing they want to hear. They're hearing that from everywhere in society. I'm like, listen, if you want to do this, or this, I can help you with that. You know, if you want to pursue it as a career, if you want to develop graphic design skills, if you want to go back and study, you know, like this is, I want to help you to do what you want to do. You know what I mean? And I'm not here to say don't do this as well. You know, like that's not my role.
You're exactly right in saying that society, you know, that's what they get from society. So there's no use offering that, you know,
yeah,
from yourself as well.
Another adult telling them what to do.
Yeah, totally, man. Was there a period of your life when you were sort of transitioning from, you know, regular work or forklift driving to becoming an artist? You know, was there a lot of doubt there? Was it difficult?
You know what? Like I always knew that. I mean, no one was really doing it. To be honest, at that time, there was, you know, we all sort of dabbled a little bit in that stuff, in legal work anyway. Let alone paid work. But it was more a fact of convincing my family, you know, because my old man is like old school working dude, you know, he's like, mate, you got to get a job and pay the bills. And then when I started to, you know, like, man, being straight up, man, I was getting paid like 187 a week.
Wow.
For working in this factory, man. I mean, I'm showing my age with that, but, you know, and that was for like, you know, 5.5 days, you know, and then I would get a graph job that'd be like 3 times that. And I'm like, listen, you know, because I was still a teenager. I'm like, listen, I'm getting more from doing these graph jobs. I want to focus on that and make it a regular thing, you know?
Yeah. So these days, do you actively seek out artistic work, or do you have most people contacting you?
It just sort of comes to me. Like I've never really had to chase it up. But also I've always maintained regular work by doing the community teaching aspect of it as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, yeah, let's speak about that. So as I mentioned in my little intro before, and again, correct me if I'm wrong with any of the terminology I'm using or anything, but you were one of the founding members of Crosswords, or you are the founding member of Crosswords?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose like that has like more backstory to it too as well.
For sure, man. So tell me a little bit about how Crosswords started, when it started, and why you decided to go down that road.
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't raised in the church or anything like that. I wasn't a Christian at all, you know. And as I started to, you know, like I said, the 80s was a very different time, you know, and things were a little bit rougher. The neighborhoods I grew up in, you know, you did what everyone else did, you know what I mean, which was, you know, deemed negative by society, and you know, you just sort of go with the flow. If you can't beat them, you join them, and stuff like that. And I just started to have my doubts when I saw more and more mates die, more and more mates get locked up. I was coming up to 18, you know, it was no longer juvie anymore. It was like the big house, and just started to ask the big questions of life, you know. And and looked into different religions, and my cultural background is quite diverse, you know. So I was like, well, will I go that way? Will I go that way? Will I go that way? Whatever. And yeah, and then I just sort of like put it out there to the universe in my understanding at that time, like, which is the way, you know. And then I had a guy come to my school that was a former gang member from New Zealand. And at that time, I was involved in the gangs. Everyone was in my neighborhood. And he sort of picked the worst kids to work with, and took us to prison, to like where he did prison ministry and, you know, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, okay, this is probably our future. And then I had another guy who started working with the gangs as well in Newtown, and he was the guy that painted the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" painting.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, and I sort of rocked up with a few of the fellas when he was painting once. He said to me after, he goes, "I thought you guys were going to roll me," but which was big at the time, you know.
Totally, yeah.
And but anyway, he sort of like started to explain to me, okay, this is how you can, if you're doing a legal wall, you know, get a permission slip. And he was getting walls for us and sort of helping me. He came from a signwriting background, so he was like, this is how you prep your wall, by scraping it back and you know, like sugar soaping it so the paint lasts longer, and rolling it and all this stuff. And so I had these two independent people, they didn't know each other, that were sort of like parts of my world. And I was like, you know what, I like what these dudes are about, you know, and I can see that there's something about them that I think is more than this world has to offer. And so, yes, I sort of, you know, made that transition and started going to church and stuff like that. But there weren't dudes in the church like me, man. You know what I mean?
I can imagine.
And, yeah, and so, you know, a few of my boys, you know, made similar decisions, and we stood out like a sore thumb. And then Brethren. Well, actually, Brethren was actually a gang. First of all, there was a gang called Soul Brothers that I was part of, and Soul Brothers were rolling people and all that with jackets on, Soul Brothers on the back, and so then when some of us, you know, started going to church and became Christian, we were like, well, we can't be associated with that, so we're just going to take half the name, Brethren. And so Brethren, yeah, wasn't a rap group. It was just a bunch of dudes, man, you know, from gang backgrounds. Some of us were MCs, some of us did graph, whatever. And yeah, and then Brethren got signed. We got signed to MDS, which was Mushroom Records affiliated at the time. And we would tour around Australia doing hip hop gigs. And yeah, we'd meet like some lonely MC in Queensland that was Christian as well, and he's like, man, no one understands me. You know, like, you know, and then, you know, a lonely b-boy somewhere else or whatever. And then we decided that we'd have a get together and just introduce everyone to each other. You know, there was this other festival happening, so people came to that, and that formed this thing called In the Midst. There's a scripture in the Bible where it says, where two or more are gathered, I'm in the midst of them. And so that was the beginning of things. And then that community, we did some tours, we released some albums, we connected with another label called Mustard Records, and then we thought, oh, you know what, maybe we need to do something a little bit more regular. And so that's what Crosswords was. So In the Midst sort of developed into Crosswords, and then we just met in Sydney 16 years ago. And then other people interstate, they said, actually, can we do the same thing? So it was sort of like half, people called it a hip hop church, but really it was like a get together where we rapped a bit, breaked a bit, maybe had some graph, shared maybe like a bit of a word or something like that. So it was like halfway between a hip hop jam and a church service. And it was just us reflecting our faith through the culture that, you know, like that we lived and breathed, you know. And yeah, other people interstate said, we like what you're doing, can we do it as well? And so once again, there was all these people that didn't know each other. We said, listen, let's get together and have like an annual event, which we called Uprock. And we flew leading b-boys or graph writers or whatever from around the world to come and do workshops with us, you know. And then some of those individuals said, can we take this idea back to our countries? And so now there's been Uprocks in Malaysia, Canada, you know, obviously Australia. There's another thing as well that's very similar in New Zealand as well, and that's, you know, the Crosswords guys over there are involved in that street talk that they do in New Zealand. But yeah, it's just become this thing that I never planned on it. It was just like, actually, a Christian bikey dude approached me and said, he was a youth worker, and he said, "Oh, we need to do like a hip hop church." And I was like, "Mad idea, bro. I'd love to go to it, but I don't want to do it, you know." But I was the most sort of best place to do it, and so yeah, I wanted to just attend, you know.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's got to a point where there's like a whole new generation that are sort of running things, and yeah, I have pulled back from like running it, so to speak, on the ground level, and yeah, I can enjoy it, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, I mean, you just said you step back a little bit, but is the Australian sort of faction have a lot of involvement other than, you know, communicating with each other, but do you oversee how things are going in the other countries and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm more in a sort of like an advisory role now. I mean, technically I'm the president of the organization or whatever, but yeah, I want the next generation to thrive, and even if it changes in some ways, to sort of, like, put it this way, like Melbourne Crosswords is predominantly graph writers, and so they don't necessarily do like a service jam, so to speak. They get together and paint, you know, and that's their community. It reflects them, you know. And yeah, like the Malaysia crew, like it's very dance focused, and so they'll do like dance events and stuff like that. And
wow,
yeah, I mean, before the restrictions, like I was traveling to a lot of the different overseas ones just to sort of jam, you know, and be with them. Queensland has their own thing going as well. I think they meet in three different locations in Queensland, and they're fairly connected to other community groups and running programs. And don't get me wrong, like it's not always faith based, you know. Like if we do workshops for other places, it's just skills based. We're not out to force. No one forced Christianity on me, you know what I mean? Like I just saw it, you know, and I was like, I like that. And so, you know, we want to sort of just lead by example, you know, and just hopefully people can see God in us, you know, so to speak.
Totally, man. And in terms of the Sydney location, do you guys have, I mean, before the pandemic, obviously, you have regular meetings? Whereabouts are they located?
Every month in Belmore.
In Belmore?
Belmore, yeah. So Embassy Church, the church where I'm a pastor now, is very supportive of Crosswords, and that. Unfortunately, a lot of it's had to go online. So the past few, we haven't been able to meet physically. It's just all been online. But that's been a blessing in disguise because, you know, we've had people from all around the world involved. And so we run a Zoom chat, you know, and because of Uprock, you know, our connections with overseas, you know, hip hop heads that are Christian is, you know, quite broad. So we'll have people in the Zoom from the US, from Puerto Rico, Korea, you know, Canada, Malaysia, like you name it, you know.
Yeah, totally, man. I watched a fair chunk of the 2020 Uprock, which was
cool, man. Cool.
Online. Yeah, it's good production, man. It was really fun to watch.
Thanks. Yeah, we had guys from Switzerland and Germany, like workshops and stuff. Yeah,
it's a I mean, as you said, it's a bit of a blessing in disguise having to sort of not allow people to attend, but you did a really good job.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
So one thing I did notice when I was sort of having a look into Crosswords and the website and the Uprock videos and stuff like that is there's like this environment that gets created that allows the people that come along, you know, the young men and women, to sort of get hands-on experience and just get involved as opposed to just being spectators.
Yeah.
Have you, you know, in a traditional sense, in terms of faith, it's more of a spectator sport, you know, out in a traditional church, so to speak, you know.
Yeah.
Do you find that you get a really good response that you offer sort of, you know, workshops and hip hop and music and things like that from the kids, like we were saying before, with, you know, using graffiti to sort of bridge the gap? Do you find that the community is much more willing to sort of cross that path, you know, and maybe speak about Christianity and speak about the bigger questions in life because there's that sort of bridge between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. First of all, we've got a saying in Crosswords: hip hop is not a spectator sport. Like, don't come and expect me to perform for you. You know, like as an MC, you know, that's why it's hard with online.
Yeah.
You vibe off the audience, you know, as a breaker, you know, like I can train in my backyard breaking, but it's not the same as being in a cypher, you know, with like everyone pumped and, you know, you're waiting your turn and you're waiting for your favorite beat to come on, you know. So we're not about that whole thing, you know, like, and unfortunately that has become a bit of a trend in the church because we've grown up watching TV. Entertain me, you know. I want to go and just like, okay, you tell me what to do, and I'm like, nah, squash that, man. You know what I mean? Hip hop's taught us as well to read between the lines. You know what I mean? I've got to make up my own mind, otherwise I'm not convinced. You know, but also, you know, I think that, you know, for me, when I first started going to church, there was a little bit of, from some sectors, distrust because I hadn't come through that church world. You know. But luckily there were a few people that said, no, we believe that you've got something to impart, you've got gifts that, you know, we value. And I think when people feel valued, they feel part of a community, you know what I mean? And so even if you don't understand it, you know, and so, you know, we want to value people, and we want people to be, sounds corny, but be all they can be, you know. And part of that is skill development and, you know, life development, and that's why, you know, like going back to what you said before, mentorship, you know. So, you know, like a lot of my stuff is, you know, like hanging out with people and just kicking it, you know. Like just to go in depth, right? So part of my background is Jewish, right? And in the Jesus sort of Bible stuff, it says the disciples, right? But the Hebrew word is talmidim, right? And the talmidim lived with the rabbi, you know, and so like you can read all about Martin Luther King, right? Or I don't know who's another leader, some famous leader that you look up to, right? But it's very different if you're hanging out with that person and you see the way they react to things, you see the way that things impact them. You know, like that's when you really get to know someone, by spending time. And, you know, like Jesus did the Sermon on the Mount and he was like preaching to thousands, but a lot of it was spent kicking it with people, having a meal, you know. And so I think that's important, is like spending time and investing in people, you know, giving of yourself, you know.
Yeah. I was going to ask if, you know, how the pandemic has sort of impacted the Crosswords community, but it sounds like you just said it right there. It must be hard to keep that same sort of ethos and not be able to be with one another.
Yeah, it's not the same. Like we're created to have a sense of community. That's why isolation and, you know, what do you call it when in prison, when you're solitary confinement, is to break people, you know. So I think we missed that, and like especially like we're saying with breaking or rapping or even graph jamming on a wall with a whole bunch of writers and then kicking it and getting a pizza after. Like that's one of the reasons I paint, man. You know what I mean? Not for the artwork. Sometimes it's just more like to kick it with just cool people, you know. So it does suffer a bit when it goes online, but we're trying to make the most of it, you know. Like for example, we did a thing, one of the Crosswords Zoom chats, where we're like, all right, everyone, let's just order pizza, you know, from one of the delivery companies, and we'll just have pizza together. But when the delivery person comes, let's tip them big, like a 50 or 100 or something like that, because man, these guys are doing the hard slog, man, on their little mopeds cruising around all over Sydney.
For sure.
You know what I mean? And so even though it's like, you know, and it wasn't like, here's 50, by the way, let me tell you about Jesus. It was like, hey, bro, props, man, here's a 50, you know, just to bless someone, you know what I mean? And we're limited with what we can do, but we can do something.
Yeah, totally, man. Yeah. And well, I guess hopefully it doesn't go on too much longer, really, and you guys can get back into you know, your regular services and just hanging out and everything like that.
Yeah, we do miss it.
Did you ever, and you know, you kind of have answered this in a way, but did you ever struggle with your identity sort of being involved in those two worlds? Obviously, if Christianity wasn't forced upon you, and as you said, you saw it and you enjoyed sort of what it was about and you got involved in that community, but did you ever in your own mind struggle with your identity being from sort of the graffiti and hip hop world and transitioning to faith?
It was more other people's issue than my own. you know, and it was a transition, you know, like I had to work out what it meant, you know, and I didn't want to become parts of church culture. I wanted to be who God made me to be, because they're two very different things, you know. But yeah, I think, you know, other people didn't understand, and you know, like, hey, man, one thing that we've been very fortunate in Australia with is that some of the founding fathers of hip hop in general in Australia happen to have some sort of faith or whatever. So you can't really diss us, because it's like, man, we were in there helping this thing evolve, you know. Um, and not every country has that same luxury. But don't get me wrong, you're always going to get haters, you know. And you know, like, especially because you know, I was a bit of a, you know, bit of a knock around guy back in the days, and when I first started going to church, you know, like people are, oh, he's gone soft now, or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, think what you're going to think, man. You know what I mean? Like, you do you, mate. You know what I mean?
I guess that would just be, yeah, I guess ignorance in a way.
Par for the course, but bro, even if it wasn't faith, it'd be something else. Oh, you're getting heaps of jobs, so I hate you. You know what I mean? And because hip hop attracts people with issues, man. Because part of it is about, you know, empowerment, and so like obviously we get into it because we want some sort of empowerment, we want some sort of identity, you know. And hip hop has formed a lot of my identity, but it's not the only thing. You know, I'm a martial arts head. I grew up. I was saying to my wife, you know, like just the other day, part of my thinking, and I'm not saying this to like take away from my faith, is based on martial arts. You know, Art of War, Book of Five Rings, like some of those things influenced the way I think as well. You know, man, Martin Luther King Jr. was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, the passive resistance things. But Mahatma Gandhi got it from Jesus in the first place. You know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with looking up to people in all different spheres and gleaning from it, you know?
Yeah, totally, man. That's a really well-rounded perspective to have, and I think it's really important to sort of have that perspective as well.
Thanks, man.
In you know, through crosswords and your workshops, and I know that I did read that you've done some work with youth in detention and things like that. What kind of challenges are these young men and women facing in their lives? Like, what difficulties do you see any patterns in the difficulties they're having? That's sort of you know, and I'm sort of assuming that you might be coming into contact with kids or young adults that are disadvantaged, and I might be wrong, but do you see any challenges that you're noticing across the board?
Obviously, socioeconomic things are, you know, a big impact, have a big impact on young people growing up. If you haven't got resources, you know, to do certain things, you know, you can feel left out. But I would say one of the big things is like, if your home life is dysfunctional, who do you look to?
Mm.
You know, for a standard of, you know, like to push you forward. You know, if you've had like chronic unemployment in your family, no one's had a job for like 3 generations.
Mm.
Are you going to think, oh yeah, man, I'm going to get a job and have a career? And you know, it just seems like out of the realms of reality. And you know, like one of the things that we try and do at Street Uni, where I work at Livo, is it's not just about like working with the young person there and then. It's about trying to support the family as well. And I know a lot of school support workers do that as well. So they'll be working with the family and maybe mum and dad, or mum or dad, if they're, you know, the family split, whatever, might have issues with, you know, substance abuse or homelessness or whatever. It's like there's a whole bunch of things that need to be addressed, you know. And yeah, and so there's no real one answer for that. But you know, I mean, one thing that like a pet thing of mine that I've sort of noticed is often some of the young guys that I work with, they haven't really got sort of like a father figure, you know. And so, you know, a few of them have actually even said to me, "Hey, man, you've taught me things that I didn't know." You know, like I've explained to dudes about, like, it's how you shave, man. You know what I mean? This is how you talk to a girl. You know,
Basic
like
stuff.
yeah, stuff that, like, you know, the old man would have done, but the old man wasn't in the picture, or the old man, you know, was incarcerated or whatever it was, you know. And there's no judgment, you know what I mean? Like, hey, man, life throws you curveballs, but little things like that, you know, and sort of like believing in people. I know that sounds corny, but like You know, I try to be really encouraging when I'm working with the young people with their art or whatever. And a few of them are like quite surprised. Oh, that's dope, man. You know, don't get me wrong. I'll say, oh, listen, why don't you work on that, develop that? You know, like that could, you know, that's a bit how you go on there, man. You know what I mean? But I can see what you're looking for. You know, like props, man. You know what I mean? And some of them are like, because you don't want to be around people that shut you down all the time. And hopefully that opens up the door. So then they'll come to me and go, oh yeah, like Matt wants me to be a better person. I'm not saying that you're not a good person now, but like skills based or professionally or with their studies or whatever, you know?
Yeah. It sounds like you really value, and, you know, just to be a pop psychologist, it sounds like you really had a few positive, well, you know, positive influences in your past, and you really understand that that's really important in a young person's life.
Yeah, yeah. I think we all need mentors, man. Going back to what you said, you know, and I have different mentors, you know, in my life for different areas. You know, as a minister, I have, you know, like I have a rabbi and all that sort of stuff that, you know, that was in my sort of messianic sort of understanding, and then, you know, like you know, other ministers and just homies that have gone before, you know, like that's what it really is, you know.
Yeah, totally, man. You mentioned your work at the Liverpool Street Uni. So tell me a little bit about your involvement there.
So yeah, like I said, I'm always about, you know, like helping young people get better at what they want to do, you know, whether it be art or dance, whatever. And so yeah, Crosswords, we were like, listen, we'll come and support. We went to the opening of Street Uni 12 years ago, and they sort of approached me and said, listen, we know you do graph workshops. Can you come here and work half a day each week and run a graph workshop? I was like, sweet, no worries. And then just when I was there was a few young people hanging around, just the way they were dressed, tracksuits or whatever. I go, oh, man, you guys B-boys. And they're like, yeah, man. And so I sort of said to the Street Uni guys, listen, can we open up the space so the breakers can train? You know, and they said, well, what do we need to do? I said, all we need is a lino, a couple $100 and a boombox. Like, that's it. It's like, it's self-sufficient. And so some of the Crosswords guys were breakers as well and supported breaking. And so came on as volunteers just to open the space and to allow, you know, the young people to develop. And we just did the each one teach one method, you know. So I taught some basics, and then some other people that were a little bit more advanced with power, whatever, taught some power, and we just switched it up like that, you know. And that just went gangbusters. And then, you know, they ended up getting me working, you know, more days there at Street Uni, and then that just developed. One of the things at Street Uni we always say is, you know, for the street, by the street. And so we don't want to just like impose programs on young people. We want to help them do what they want to do, like I said. And so yeah, then there were some other dancers hanging around, you know, but they weren't breakers, and so they were like choreo dancers and poppers and all that sort of stuff. And we were like, well, what do you guys need? And they said, oh, we need some mirrors and a wooden floor and all that sort of stuff. So we worked with the dancers, did some fundraising, and then we built a dance studio in there, you know. And so then that became another thing. And some of those dance crews have like gone on and just like killed it, you know. Justice Crew used to train there, you know, different times. And there's other choreo crews and that represented Australia in international battles overseas and stuff that trained there. But it's just more about providing a space and helping the young people to do what they want to do, and everything's free. You know, we don't charge for anything. You know, and we work with like groups like Oz Harvest to provide groceries and food and lots of stuff, and we feed the young people, and you know, and yeah, and it's a secular organisation. You know, like it's come from, you know, the Reverend Ted Knopf's, but it's a secular organisation now. So you know, it's just yeah, working with all the different groups and the parents and the grandparents as well. It's not just about the young people, it's like the whole family picture, you know, in as much as we can with our limited resources, you know.
Yeah, well, hopefully you know, I think places like that are so important in a community, so any support that you can get is super valuable.
Yeah, so it's not just Liverpool now. So
okay,
so actually just to paint the picture as well, so the Reverend Ted Knopf, he was doing community work back in the 60s or whatever. His grandson and some other people were going out to remote communities, just with a van with this like a recording studio in the van, and working in the communities, with rapping and other elements of hip hop and stuff. And then they thought, oh, we need like a home base for that. So that was Matt Noss, Ted Noss's grandson, and some of the other homies. And then Street Uni Livo started, and then other ones popped up because we already had the drug and alcohol rehab, the Calm and Palm project, and stuff like that. So we've always had like a counselling, sort of support thing for people with substance abuse and that. And yeah, so then other street unis popped up. So Mount Druitt, Penrith. There's 3 in Queensland, Canberra.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so it's all like part of a big sort of network.
Yeah, and how's the response? I mean, you just working at Liverpool, or do you go to the other ones as well?
Yeah, quite often. So because some of us specialise, like they haven't necessarily got a graph worker at Penrith or Mount Druitt, and so like I'll go over there and maybe do a few workshops, maybe help them paint the place with some artwork in the space to make it a little bit more inviting. And I've gone to the Queensland ones. I was working in Logan up there with those guys. Every second week I was flying up there for a while.
Wow, yeah. And do in terms of materials, when you're doing your graffiti workshops and that, do you have an involvement with the brands? Do they help you out in that regard?
Yeah, so we've been pretty well supported. MTN has like been a big supporter of us, and we believe in what you guys are doing. We don't really ask much. Just hashtag us. If you're doing a program, and they'll look after us with some stuff as well. We're just about to start this. We just started speaking with Dulux as well. So, and even Bunnings has helped out with some stuff. And case by case basis and things.
Yeah,
like
cool. That. Well, that's really good, man. Does it ever surprise you, where you've gotten to in regards to working with these communities and being so entrenched in in young people's lives and using hip hop in graffiti and breaking and your faith and everything? Did you foresee all this happening? Was it part of the plan, or did it just sort of roll out as the years went on?
No idea, bro. I'm still just going with the flow. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm just sort of like, I don't know, like I just feel an inkling, It's funny, man. Like I got asked to speak at this like Christian leaders, pastors thing in the Philippines once. And it was this thing called a vision casting, right? I didn't ever know what a vision casting was, man. I rang my brother because he's a pastor now as well. And I was like, what's a vision casting, man? He goes, oh, you basically talk about what you think God's doing, And so I went over there and they were like, oh, mighty hip hop pastor, like give us pearls of wisdom. And I was like, sorry, man, can't help. I said, but let me tell you what I think. I said, often you just see a need, and that means that you're the one that's meant to help with that need. Like it's as simple as that, like Crosswords and In the Midst started out of a need for a whole bunch of Christian hip hop heads that no one could relate to get together. That was it. And then that developed into a national network, and that developed into an international network because there were other people, Street Uni was like, yeah, man, teaching some graph. Actually, the breakers need something. Oh, actually, the poppers and the choreo dancers need something, and yeah, it just evolves, and you just learn on the go. You know what I mean? Like heaps of these things like that I'm doing. Like, man, Zoom. I was like, what the hell, Zoom, mate? You know what I mean? Like I had to sort of like, upskill because it was a necessity. And a lot of these things, it's just like, okay, young people are going through this at the moment. I would say that one of the big things that's going to change is, I think this is going to affect how people interact. Like put it this way, like, man, some social media can be a cesspool of like angry ass opinions, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just wonder what's going to happen when people are face to face again. Are you still going to be that outspoken? You know what I mean? Or are you going to chill? Or are you going to be awkward around people? You know what I mean? And like we've even seen like how many people, the increase in amount of people that have been calling, like Beyond Blue and Kids Helpline and through that. I think that this will have long-standing effects on society, man.
I agree wholeheartedly. Exactly. What do? You make the most of it. But even myself, I haven't really been in contact with too many people other than my family and a few people at work. And sometimes out and about when there's a few people around, I definitely notice like, oh, this is sort of, I got to get used to this again.
Yeah. And there's young people that, like, put it this way, it's what it's been, 2 years roughly.
About 2 years, or coming up to 2 years since late
Yeah,
2019. Yeah,
my son's just 2. You know what I mean? So, like, even my most recent son, like, there's family members he hasn't even met. He only knows them through a screen.
totally.
And that's going to have some sort of effect. Hopefully not long term, but in the immediate, it will.
Yeah, man. So, have you thought about ever, and you might or have already done so, but have you done any formal training in counselling or anything like that from your work through the community in Crosswords and at the street uni?
Well, they provide us with, at street uni, like, we work with counsellors and stuff like that, and a lot of them are qualified in psychiatry, and our head psych, he does workshops with us in sort of like identifying stuff and personal stuff. But if it does get a little bit too full on, like people are, divulging serious stuff, then it's out of my professional realm, and I will, refer them to one of the professional counsellors and support them through that process, as well. Like, I don't just say, see you later, palm me off. But I don't know if that's necessarily my main sort of calling as a counsellor. Yeah, I'm still a skill-based kind of dude,
Yeah.
And most of my counselling will happen while I'm doing something. It's like the whole men's shed thing, Dudes don't often like want to sit in front of each other and start crying and talking about their problems, man. You know what I mean? But if they're doing something, like, I don't know, it's a little bit less invasive. And so, yeah, I still will do some, what'd you call it? Pop counselling or whatever, pop psychology.
Pop psychology, yeah.
Yeah, like while I'm painting a wall, or, like while we're writing a track together. That is one of the best ways, man. We're like, okay, let's talk about something that's going on, and then it all starts to come out, and it comes out through the music. And I'll tell you what, man, if I wasn't rapping as well, I'd probably be in the psych ward too, because like, like, there's been so many times I've been going through things, and art has just been my outlet, man. You know what I mean? And I know there's probably heaps of people here that go, man, I can relate to that, And sometimes it's not even making art. Sometimes it's just experiencing art, listening to a song, and it's like Stevie Wonder is singing what you're thinking. You know what I mean? Or
Totally.
Whatever. Or J. Cole is like saying, like, man, that I'm exactly where you're at, or Eminem or whoever,
Yeah, totally, man. I think that's really important as well. You mentioned that you're a marriage celebrant as well.
Yeah. So I'm doing a wedding next week. Actually, he's an MC.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's
actually
awesome.
Most of the weddings I've done has been for hip hop heads.
And is that just through friendship connections, or do you do that professionally?
Through Crosswords. Oh, well, I can't do it professionally because as a minister, I'm not allowed to charge.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I can't advertise and charge. So it's like my public service,
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, funerals and weddings and all that sort of stuff, and it's a big deal for me, like, because some people have said, oh, like, we'd love it if you could do our wedding, and all that stuff. And I'm like, always like, I'm honored, man. I will always be in your mind, in your memory, because I was there for such a pivotal time, and it's a way that I can, be a blessing, and a lot of them want me to do it because they prefer a friend to do it. And also because I'm not going to do it stuffy, man. Like, I still wear kicks, you know what I mean? I've done it wearing Gazelles and old school gear, you know what I mean? Because they're hip hop heads too,
For sure. Yeah, that's the way it should be if you're into that type of thing. So
yeah.
Why not? Yeah, definitely. Well, look, man, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know you're a busy guy, but one thing I did want to ask you is, and we've been speaking about sort of young adults and stuff like that, but what kind of advice would you give to someone that sort of wants to make a life out of creativity, like you've done? Not in the same way, but, someone that might want to not go down the traditional road of getting a job and do it, and, maybe they've got some talent in one area or another. Is there any advice that you can give to someone sort of thinking about that way of life?
I mean, everyone always says believe in yourself and all that sort of stuff, right? And that's like easier said than done, let's be honest,
Mm-hmm.
It's true, but it is easier said than done. I would say, like we sort of touched on before, seek out mentors, people that have done it before, or people that can help you in that journey, whether it be, helping you to study, or, like, even recently when I went back to study at art school, I had one of my homies, he's from Southwest Sydney as well. And, I was one of 2 people in the whole college from my area, man. You know what I mean?
Really? Wow.
And so, and I went and saw my mate, and I was like, bro, I feel so culturally disconnected. You know what I mean? And he was like, don't worry, man, this and that. You know, like, and he encouraged me. So sometimes you just need those people that they might have only gone through it a year ahead of you, but at least, you know, they've got a bit of advice. You know, and yeah, just like people that are genuine, people that are genuinely interested in you getting better, you know, because there's a lot of people that are selfish, let's be honest, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not in a user kind of way, but can help you to achieve what you need to do, you know, like, because you will have, you will need cheerleaders from time to time, you know,
Yeah.
even if it's one person, man,
Yeah.
you know, one person believes in you, then that just makes all the world of difference when you're doubting yourself. Because, you know, this world's full of like gaslighting, you know? So,
Totally,
yeah.
man. Do you think there's many avenues in the current sort of, you know, pandemic aside, but in this sort of day and age for artists to go down that road? I mean, is there a lot of work out there per se?
In a professional sense?
Yeah.
I think so, because, you know, like people will always want something that, you know, speaks to them, that, you know, makes them feel good about themselves. And, you know, and that's what art does. And art's like real, you know, like if ever you've gone to like those suburbs where it's all just like brand new houses, and, you know, it can look like Legoland, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Truman Show style.
Yeah, yeah. And there's like hardly any sort of influence of like real people, you know. You know, I heard once on this radio show they were talking about mental health and stress, and they were saying how nature, when you see nature, like, it was an expert talking on it in scientific terms, unlike me,
Yeah.
and saying that when you see nature, it actually reduces your blood pressure and actually basically centers you, right?
Yeah. Right.
And they were saying, and it doesn't even have to be real nature. It could be a painting of a mountain, and it will
Really?
have that effect. So I think organic shapes and colors and all that sort of stuff, you know, like
Therapeutic.
they're therapeutic, you know, like we
Mm.
were blessed to have KRS-One come to Street Uni and do a workshop. And
Really?
he talked about the space, and he goes, the fact that this place is covered in color, he goes, this will trigger things in your subconscious to make you creative,
Wow.
you know? And I was like, that's dope, you know?
Yeah. That is dope. That's it. He's such a I mean, obviously such an amazing figure, but really smart guy as well. You've met him before, haven't you?
Yeah.
Aside from the Street University, you've done a tour. You were on a tour with him, or you did a show?
Yeah. So when he came out, he wanted to connect with community groups, and so myself and MC Trey, we lined up a whole bunch of things. You know, he couldn't do all of them because obviously he was on a tight schedule, but he did some stuff in Queensland, stuff at Street Uni in Liverpool.
Yeah.
And we had some really good discussions. And the thing that was cool is, like, the first time I met him, I said, I'm really looking. He knew who I was, and they want to know everything about all the people on the tour, you know. So I was like, yeah, I'm MC, B-boy, graph writer, minister, but of Jewish heritage, blah 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 blah. And anyway, I met him. I was like, hey man, I'm really looking forward to learning from you, you know. And he's like, I'm looking forward to learning from you. And I was like, what are you going to learn from me, man? You know, I'm just some kid from Australia, man. You know, I'm not a kid anymore. But anyway, he said, no, he goes, I want to see what's happened to this culture that we started when it's gone to the other side of the world, and when other cultures have taken it on board, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we kicked it, you know, and we were talking about what hip hop's about and all that sort of stuff. And I said, man, the way I see hip hop's like bread or rice, you know, like it's like a basis, and then you add your own flavor to it, you know. And you know, like the multicultural neighborhood that I grew up in has influenced my hip hop.
Totally.
You know what I mean? It's influenced my food as well, which is good. But
Yeah.
you know, like a whole bunch of things, you know.
That's a good way to put it, man. That's a really good perspective. And it's really interesting to know. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but that he would come out here on tour and want to meet with members of the community and understand people's lives, and how, like, that's really introspective and insightful. But again, it doesn't surprise me coming from him.
And it shows the humility, because a lot of artists will come out and go, let me school you about everything.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Especially,
definitely.
I mean, his title in hip hop is the teacher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
he's like, man, any teacher that's worth anything is always learning. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what keeps me doing youth work, man. it keeps me young.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to be one of those, like, those old uncles that sit around with an Elvis hairstyle and an Elvis belt buckle, just listening to Elvis every day. Like, I don't want to be one of those dudes that like dress from the 80s all the time and I just only listen to 80s. Don't get me wrong, I freaking love my 80s, man. You know what I mean? But like I'm vibing on new stuff too.
For sure, man. Yeah, it's important to keep it to keep yourself in the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms, in the moment of where the culture is at this point in time, and taking it as it comes. Sometimes you can get stuck in the past a little bit, I find. So it's good to stay away from that. You mentioned your Jewish heritage. Do you mind if you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my family's mixed, like most people in Australia, second, third generation, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, my mum, and like my old man and my dad's side, they were all theatre people. And when I was a little kid, my dad was directing the show Fiddler on the Roof, which is about the Jews in Russia.
Yeah, of course.
And so he said to me and my brother, he goes, "You got to understand, this is your heritage, man. We're not from Russia. We're from Germany. We're Ashkenazi." But I was like, "Oh, what the hell does that mean?" You know what I mean? I was like a little kid, and all my friends, like growing up in Bankstown, they all spoke like 2 or 3 languages, and I was like, "Well, what's my language?" And so like, oh, it was Yiddish, okay, but like then I was like, oh, okay, it's Hebrew. So then I started to, I went and started to learn Hebrew at a synagogue and all that sort of stuff. And
wow,
sort of I leaned towards that culturally. Part of my family's Irish as well, and some of them were from the UK, and some of them were convicts. It's like the whole kit and caboodle. But I sort of like really gravitated towards that. And when my grandfather died, like I made a trip to Israel, and I've been back again with the whole family and stuff like that, just to learn about it. But I went to Ireland as well, at the same time, and I went to the little village where my grandma's family were from, and so hip hop teaches us, like Public Enemy sampling, James Brown. So you're like, well, what's James Brown? And you look into James Brown, and so for me, it was like, okay, my grandparents are this. I want to look into it. I want to know, and what's that? You know where you're going if you know where you've been. You know what I mean? And why I do certain things and stuff like that. And so I'm still very connected to that part of my heritage, and still maintain some of the cultural practices. Ones that don't contradict my Christian faith, but I think it enhances it if anything.
Yeah, man. I can imagine it would. Was it difficult learning to read and speak Hebrew?
I can speak a little bit and I can understand a bit. I'm still learning to write it. That's the thing, because it's a total different alphabet system, or it's an alphabet system, And so, yeah, but, like I speak to my boys in Hebrew, and actually, the funny thing is my wife's Pacific Islander, and so I actually speak more Fijian than I do Hebrew. So I speak to my boys in Fijian, and my wife's background's Tuvaluan as well, so from Tuvalu.
Yeah, okay.
So like I speak to them in all of the languages. I understand a little tiny bit of Tuvaluan and Samoan. So Fijian, Tuvaluan, English, Hebrew.
Yeah, nice, man. And have you are your kids sort of starting to get into a little bit of breakdancing? You show them a few moves?
It's funny, like,
well, obviously your 2-year-old, that is.
All of it, man. Like my wife took him to like kids Zumba class, and then she sent me a video, and because the thing is, my son sees breakers like live, face to face, you know what I mean? And he's been, when we've been having b-boy ciphers and that, and she goes, here's a video of Enoch at kids Zumba, and he like ran around a circle, did a top rock, and then did a freeze. You know what I mean? And I was like, that's my boy, And then one morning I wake up and he's like written all over the walls, and I'm like, I can't be angry at you, like I'd be a hypocrite, you know what I mean? So
exactly,
yeah, because he sees that, and so that's normal for him. And so as soon as he gets a pen or a pencil, man, I'm like, stay away from the walls.
Yeah, totally.
Just painted that wall,
You'll be doing a lot of painting.
Yeah.
They pick up. I've got a 5-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy, and it's incredible how quickly they pick things up if they're just exposed to something without even realizing. And you don't really have to give them too many pointers. They'll just look at something and they'll pick it up so quick. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Even like sometimes we'll be with my parents, who obviously don't speak the Pacific Island languages, and he'll be saying a word, and I'll say to mum and dad, "Oh, that's a Fijian word that he said,"
Yeah, right.
something like that,
Yeah, that's cool, man. Well, listen, man, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I've had my own personal connection with you, as I said earlier, since I started doing graffiti in my early teens. So to actually sit here one-on-one and talk to you is it's an absolute honor, and it's been a real pleasure for me, and I can't thank you enough. Just before I let you go, though, what have what's on the cards for you into next year, aside from raising your children and things like that, and continuing Crosswords? Is there anything that you're exploring?
I've been approached to do some travel overseas,
Yep.
but that is really going to depend on what's happening in the world, and I used to travel like multiple times overseas every year, so this has been killing me, man. I feel like Gilligan on Gilligan's Island. Hopefully avenues will open up so that I can get back overseas and take my family, because I want my family to experience, what I've seen overseas. You learn so much when you travel, man.
Yeah.
More than from books,
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, like, man, I'm trying to get back into breaking, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's, dad bod's a real thing, bro. And, I'm sure, unless you've got a six-pack ab and I'm just judging you.
No, I totally get it, mate. It creeps up quickly.
Yeah. But, and other than that, working on some music, but it's hard. This is a season where I've got to devote a lot of time to, supporting the boys growing up, and, my wife in that whole process as well.
Yeah, totally, man. Is the travel that you're planning on doing, is that for an artistic purpose, like
commissions? It's all hip hop related.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah, speaking at a hip hop conference and judging a breaking battle and things like that.
Yeah, cool, man. That's awesome. All right, man. Well, yeah, again, I really appreciate it. Where can people find you online, and where can people find Crosswords and all the other projects you're involved with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram as Mystery973. So that's just Mistery 973. That's probably the best one. Like, I'm actually, well, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but I've been contemplating and sort of started dabbling on an autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
And when that starts, I'll do a website and all that sort of bizzo. Yeah, there's a little website as well that my homies Meek and his wife put together, which is just Pieces of Mystery with the I, MISTRY. And that's out there. But it's, we're going to do something proper soon.
Yeah, that'd be cool, man. I'd be straight onto an autobiography, man.
Thanks,
sure.
Man. And street uni,
Yep.
Just street university. Once we're back up and running, man. Like, if you get young people 10 to 25 that want to learn some skills, whatever, come down and jam with us or whatever, or even if you need support, with what's going on, hit us up. Just street university on Facebook or whatever, and also Crosswords as well if you're interested in the faith aspect of it. It's KROSSWERDZ. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of bizzo as well.
Sick, man. Well, once the pandemic sort of lightens up a little bit, I'd love to come in and say good day.
For sure, man. You're dope. Yeah. The honor's been all mine, man.
Thank you for listening to the Lead Poison Podcast.
talking to me? Oh yeah? Huh? Okay.
Huh?